Well, we can finally move on to the recruiting news that we've been talking about all week. Keep talking about how we're going to break down the defensive side of Pitt's 2026 recruiting class, and now we finally can because we were kind of waiting for another commitment to join the class, and that finally happened yesterday when Logan Nagle, the defensive lineman from DePaul Catholic in New Jersey, announced his commitment. He committed earlier. He committed on like Sunday or Monday. I forgot exactly when it was. But he didn't announce until yesterday, so we were kind of waiting. And there were other topics to discuss, too. I forget what else we talked about this week. We talked about revenue sharing yesterday. We had something else on Tuesday that was I lose track. I lose track on our morning pits and what we talk about. Let me go to. Actually, I'm going to bring up the YouTube page. We looked at the offense. The Deron Barksdale commitment. So we just talked about Pitt recruiting the Whippeal on Tuesday because they got that commitment from Deron Barksdale. And then yesterday we talked about revenue sharing, partially because those were interesting topics and things I wanted to talk about and somewhat relevant and seemed to be on Pitt fans' minds, and partially because I was waiting for Logan Nagle to announce his commitment so we could talk about the defensive side of Pitt's recruiting. Now, Nagle has announced, and we've got something to talk about here on the Thursday edition of the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So let's talk about Logan Nagle, what he brings to the recruiting class, and where Pitt stands overall with defensive recruiting in the class of 2026 here on the Thursday edition of the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's Thursday here on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com, hanging out with you today. A little bit of Pitt sports talk to get your day started. Of course, you know the website, Panther-Lair.com, the Pitt site on the 24/7 Sports Network, where we cover all things Pitt. Pitt football, Pitt basketball, Pitt recruiting, Pitt transfer portal, everything going on in the world of Pitt sports. We talk about it at Panther-Lair.com. We write about it, we report on it, and provide lots of content. And then you guys on the message boards provide the conversation in the community. If you're looking to hang out with other Pitt fans and talk with other Pitt fans about Pitt sports, the best place to do it is right there, Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, our YouTube channel here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We have all kinds of Pitt video content for you all the time. I mean, we have daily Morning Pitt videos like this one right here to get your day started. Monday through Friday, we release a new video just talking about something going on in Pitt sports. And then we have our weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. We did that last night. We have press conferences and post-game shows and interviews and all kinds of things to keep you interested and entertained at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like this video and subscribe. That way you won't miss any of our Pitt video content at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, so new commitment came in yesterday. Logan Nagle, a defensive lineman from DePaul Catholic in New Jersey. We listed him at about 6'5", 250. Is that the size he told me he was? I'm trying to remember his exact size. Yeah, he's up to like 275, he told me. Nagle is an interesting guy. I think initially was being talked about as a defensive tackle prospect. That seemed to be where his fit might be. I think that's how we have him ranked on 24/7 Sports as a defensive tackle prospect, but he's got a lot of interest in playing defensive end. He played defensive end in high school. He would like to do so in college as well. And the Pitt coaches have told him, well, we think you might be able to do both. Maybe you can play outside, maybe you can play inside. We'll see whichever one fits best, but you get an opportunity. And I think that's what he wanted. That maybe ultimately was the deciding factor in Logan Nagle's recruitment. It came down to Pitt and Michigan State. Michigan State was pretty strong in this one. I think Nagle was considered a Michigan State lean, but I think he liked Pitt a lot and really wanted to go to Pitt and had a lot of interest in Pitt. But maybe one of the biggest determining factors, or one of the biggest separating factors between Pitt and Michigan State in this recruitment, is that Michigan State said, yeah, you're a defensive end. And Pitt was saying, yeah, you're a defensive tackle. Well, on Sunday, that changed a little bit. Pat Narduzzi and Tim Dowse, the defensive line coach at Pitt, got on the phone with Logan Nagle and basically said, look, we don't think you're just a tackle anymore. You could play tackle or end. We're going to give you an opportunity to do whichever one you want, and then we'll see what fits best. And that sealed the deal. I think Nagle liked everything about Pitt, the campus, the coaches, the relationships, all of those things, and was partial to everything at Pitt, but it was just the position seemed to be the one question that was sort of unanswered. And, the way Nagle put it to me, that pretty much answered that question and fixed that one issue that existed with Pitt. Now, He's committed. And I think this is one of the better recruiting wins for Pitt because of what I just said. I think he was leaning toward Michigan State. I think most people who followed this recruitment felt like Michigan State was most likely to land him. I think most people who followed this recruitment felt like it was a shock and a bit of an upset for Pitt to pull it off, to land Logan Nagle and get him away from Michigan State. So a good recruiting win here for Pitt. And I don't think it's just because they told him he could play defensive end. I mean, look, Michigan State was already telling him he could play defensive end there. And so, I think Pitt needed to match Michigan State on the position side of things, and then they had to out-recruit. And I think they had. I think the fact that they got as far as they got to a point where, they said, they got themselves to a point where by saying, hey, we'll give you a shot at defensive end, that sealed the deal. And they got to that point just by recruiting him really well. Showing the love, working hard. Pat Narduzzi and Tim Dow staying in contact with Logan Nagle all the time. And, I think it paid off. I think, this is one, and I think there's a handful in this class, of situations where I think the Pitt staff just had done a good job recruiting, but then in the last month or two just really put their foot on the gas and really stepped it up and increased the work. You know what I mean? I think that it worked with landing Logan Nagle. I think it worked with, swinging Reston Lehman from Peters Township back to Pitt, where he was, leaning to Pitt for a long time. And then it looked in the spring like Rutgers was going to be the school. But Pitt's work and hard work, really, and effort in recruiting Lehman got him to swing back and pick the local school to stay at. And I think there's a handful of guys in this class that they've done that, where they have just worked really hard, showed the love, stayed in contact, made Pitt a presence for these recruits. And sometimes in recruiting, like honestly, our old friend Tim Salem, the former Pitt tight ends coach, used to always say that recruiting's like shaving. If you don't do it every day, you're a bum, or you look like a bum. And I think to some extent, recruiting, for all the things that it has become and all the different factors that are considered, it still comes down to working hard and just constant contact and being in touch with these recruits all the time. And I always say that, I've said this for years, because going back to like the late 2000s, people would ask what made Jeff Hafley such a good recruiter at Pitt when he was back, when he was a defensive backs coach, 2008, 2009, 2010, back around then. What made him such a good recruiter at Pitt? And I said, the key was, and I knew this because I asked Jeff, like, what's the secret here, man? Why do you seem to have so much success recruiting? And he said the key is you just have to work hard. You have to stay in touch with these guys every day. They always have to have you reminding them that they're interested in Pitt. Because if you fall out of contact, if you don't maintain that communication on a constant and consistent basis, it starts to drift. You've got to keep Pitt prominent, at the forefront of their recruitment, so that they're always thinking about Pitt. You don't want it to slide off the radar. And I think that's what they were able to do. That's what they're able to do in most good recruiting instances, where they land a good recruit or get somebody that pull off an upset, like with Logan Nagle here. I think that's what it usually comes down to. And I think we've seen it in this class several times, where they just, through sheer hard work, have just out-recruited other schools and some good schools to land these guys. With Nagle beating Michigan State for a kid from DePaul Catholic, a New Jersey kid, and a guy who was high on Michigan State to win one straight up against the Spartans is a pretty good recruiting win. And, major credit to Pat Narduzzi and Tim Doust for pulling that off, I should say. Picking him up and pulling it off. So Logan Nagle picked Pitt. He also had offers from Michigan State, Boston College, and Indiana. Those were his three other official visits. He went to Indiana at the beginning of May, Boston College at the end of May, and then went to Michigan State after Pitt. So, another sort of interesting angle there. Though a lot of times that last official visit is the one that can kind of seal the deal. You sort of want to, on one hand, you want to be first, because ideally you get guys to commit and they cancel all their subsequent visits and everything's over. But on the other hand, you want to have the last visit so you can kind of, beat everybody else. It's a little more rare, I think, for it to go the way this did, where Nagle took 2 visits, then came to Pitt on June 5th, that first official visit weekend, and then went to Michigan State the next weekend and ended up committing to Pitt. You don't usually see it go that way, but I think that's another testament to Pitt's recruiting with Nagle and what they were able to land. I think he looks like a really good prospect, really good defensive line prospect. I think he'll get that opportunity at defensive end. My guess would still be that his future is inside, but who knows? 6'5", 275-pound defensive end might not be the worst thing if he can move and he can get off the edge and get in the backfield and finish plays. So one way or the other, I think they got a really good defensive lineman. That defensive class is kind of slowly growing. The defensive recruiting class overall in this class of 2026 and the defensive line as well. With Nagle on board, they now have 9 defensive recruits in the class, 21 total commitments. 12 of them are on offense, 9 are on defense. We talked about the offense earlier in the week and said we would get to the defense at some point. Like I say, I was waiting for Logan Nagle to announce his commitment so we could talk about that side of the ball. But Pitt now has 3 defensive line commitments in this 2026 recruiting class. Nagle joins Reston Lehman, who I mentioned earlier, the defensive end from Peters Township, as well as Lincoln Hoke, the defensive tackle from North Allegheny. Now, I think Lehman's pretty locked into being a D end. Hoke is pretty locked into being a D tackle. While I expect Nagle to end up at D tackle, he could play either one. So, you could look at it like, well, maybe they've got 2 tackles and an end or 2 ends and a tackle. I would look at it like they've got 3 defensive linemen committed right now. And that's good. I think they need to get at least one more, but that's a good spot to be with, to keep growing. Like, when we talked about big needs last week, we talked about, well, they only have 1 end and 1 tackle. They can't just sign 2 defensive linemen. Well, they're building it up now, and adding Nagle is a pretty good add to that group to get it up to 3. Linebackers we've talked about a bunch of times. Really like this group: Isaiah Simmons and Marcus Jennings, and Desmond Johnson. I think these guys are they're the kind of linebackers that fit at Pitt. And I think the Pitt coaches did a really good job finding the right kind of guys. I think they've really honed in on the type of guys that they want, and they've done a good job finding those guys, and they've done a great job landing those guys. And this recruiting class feels like another one that's just going to pick up from where they left off. I think you can look over the last 3-4 years, and there are some really good recruiting classes of linebackers. And it's showing up in the field, too, where, it's Kyle Lewis and Rasheem Biles, Braylon Lovelace all playing really well. Arrow very much pointing up on, Cam Lindsey and Jeremiah Marcelin. And, I think it's a really good group on the roster right now. Almost all of it was built from high school recruiting, not the transfer portal. They have Jaden Bonsu as the one transfer coming in from Ohio State, former safety who's going to play that star linebacker position. But even if he ends up on the 2 deep, if Bonsu does, that's 5 out of 6 guys on the depth chart, 5 out of 6 guys on the 2 deep who were high school recruits and not transfers. They have not had to go to the transfer well much at linebacker. Some, Kylan Johnson was a Kylan Johnson was a transfer. Shane Simon was a transfer. Tyler Wills was a transfer. Key Thompson was a transfer. So they've gone to the well. For this year's roster, they haven't had to go to the well all that much, bringing in transfer linebackers. So, that's a little bit better. But we've talked about this a lot, how much they've improved the linebacker recruiting, how well they've done in the last few years, and how much they seem to have really honed in on the guys they want, the kinds of guys they want, and landing those guys pretty consistently. And I think Simmons, Jennings, and Johnson look like a great trio. I know Markel Dabney is still out there. I don't know. His commitment, I'm guessing he's going to commit at some point. Anytime. It could have happened between the time I recorded this video and the time you're watching it. I think he's down to Pitt and Michigan. I don't think Pitt's going to win that one. It would be nice if they did. Obviously, then you have a huge linebacker class, a really good linebacker class, with 4 guys. But if they can hold on to these 3, that's a pretty good spot to be in. Simmons, Jennings, and Johnson look like a really good linebacker trio for Pitt. At corner, they still have just the one guy, Kentrail McCray. I think they'd like to get another corner. My guess is they would like to get another corner. I think they should get another corner because, one's just not enough. I think particularly when you're looking at a bigger class, they're already up to 21 recruits, but they have room to take more. They could get to 23, 24, 25, wherever they want to go. They can add more guys. They're going to have room on the roster to do so. So they should get another corner, even though they've built up, a little bit of young depth at corner. I think adding another one in the recruiting class would be a good thing. And then they had the two safeties, Isaac Patterson, who committed, early January, February, somewhere around there, and then Deron Barksdale, who committed on Sunday. We talked about Barksdale quite a bit. I think they're probably good there. I mean, this staff will never turn away a good safety prospect, I think. But I think they're probably pretty set at safety. I don't think they'll need anything else unless they get a sense that one of these guys is going to, flip or something like that. So I think they should be good there. So really you're looking at another defensive lineman, end or tackle, whatever you want to do, but just another defensive lineman to get up to 4. I think another corner to get to 2 there. And then you might be all right. You might be okay at that point and not really have a huge need for more defensive recruits in this 2026 recruiting class. You just take best player available if somebody wants to commit. If they could get another D lineman and another corner, that would put them up to 11 commitments in the class, give them 23 total commitments. And I think you still have some spots to play with there. Remember, you got 105 roster spots that you can use for walk-ons or scholarship guys. You're not limited by the 85-man scholarship anymore. There might still be a limit on 25 initial scholarships in any given year, but that doesn't matter. You can work. They've been working around that for years. So you're not limited by the 25. You're not limited by an 85. You have room to take more guys. If there's another linebacker, if Markel Dabney does want to commit and be your 4th linebacker in the class, you can take him because he's good enough to merit that spot. If you can find another safety, okay, they're good with 2 safeties, but if you can get another one, you take them. They have 4 wide receivers committed, but there's a handful of other guys who took official visits, and some of them I think it would be pretty tough to say no to. So you take that commitment. And look, if you have 5 commits at wide receiver right now, or 3 commits or 4 commits at linebacker right now, that's not a bad thing because who knows? You're probably going to have a couple of these guys who committed in June end up decommitting. And that I couldn't look at the list right now and tell you, oh, this guy's going to go, that guy's going to go, or anything like that. But it's just you play the numbers. Every year they lose guys, right? They lose a couple of guys. So you're probably going to have that again. So take whoever you can right now. If you have good players that want to come, you don't turn them away within reason. But you're not to that point now where you would need to turn anyone away. Take good players if you can get them. If it's another quarterback, which it won't be because you already have 2, but if it's another quarterback, take him. If it's another linebacker, take him. If it's another wide receiver, take him. Definitely want to get another defensive lineman. Definitely want to get another corner. Anybody else, if there's a good tight end, take him and ask him if he has a brother who can come too. All right. So that's the recruiting class. That's where they stand right now. Can't wait till tomorrow. We got the mailbag edition of the Morning Pitt. Great questions already rolling in. We have questions left over from last week. We have new questions this week. We're going to have a lot of great stuff to talk about on the mailbag tomorrow. If you want to get your question in, you can still do it at Panther-Lair.com to get all your Pitt sports coverage and hang out with other Pitt fans on the message board. The message board is where you can submit your questions for the mailbag. So go do that. While you're here, make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you won't miss any of our Pitt video content. All right, thanks so much for tuning in today. Have a great Thursday. We'll catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pitt mailbag right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.